Hello there, I'm K-Ball, and welcome to Human Skills, where I interview tech industry leaders about all the non technical skills that go into success in the tech industry. Elaine May has an incredibly varied background in the tech industry. She's worked on hardware teams and software teams, worked as an engineer, manager, director, and VP. She's worked at large international companies and small startups, and currently, she's a senior engineering manager at Netlify. In this conversation, we spoke about shifting engineering organizations to be more customer minded, product minded engineers working with product, and more. But the theme of the conversation was around organizational change. What the process of organizational change looks like, how to help people change, the importance of respecting the past, and much, much more. Please enjoy this conversation with Elaine May. Elaine, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk with you. Let's start with learning a little bit about you. So, can you share a little bit of your background and how you came to care about these things I'm calling human skills?
Yeah, so I have been in product development for quite a long time. As first as a development engineer, and then as a manager. And fairly early on, I realized that human skills were as important as the technical skills to getting projects done with large numbers of people. I came up in an age when peopleware was a big thing. It was relatively new at that time. And so that was kind of my first introduction to the importance of people skills.
Awesome. And when we were getting ready for this, you mentioned that you have a long interest in kind of organizational change and change management. Can you maybe start with just a description of how you think about organizational change?
Sure. And maybe also a description of how I came to realize its importance. Because,
Yeah.
yeah, so I was a development engineer and then I became a manager, and we used a form of Agile uh, several years before the manifesto was written. That it worked pretty well for us. And then I took a different role inside the company, going around to different groups of developers and trying to help them adopt this methodology. And what I found was that um, there was a lot of cynicism, and there had been a lot of failed attempts to improve how teams develop software. And as I looked into what they had done, it was rarely that they picked the wrong method or the wrong tool or the wrong process. It was that they hadn't really attended to the human side of change. So, humans were not a collection of bits that can be recompiled into a way of doing things. We have emotions, we have all sorts of things that make that hard. And so I really dived into understanding how to do change within organizations.
Yeah. No, I love that. And a couple different directions I can go. I want to actually dig into cynicism a little bit because I think that it's easy to get cynical when you've seen failed changes or when you've heard one thing and seen behavior that's different, um, and it can be poisonous. But how do you bring people out of that?
Yeah. So I have been cynical. And so I think that cynics are failed optimists or disappointed optimists. And so the pattern that I saw with failed changes was a group of engineers would get excited about some new way of doing things. And in this company at this time, the executives were all from a hardware background, so they did not understand software at all. And so they would just sign off on the change. And then the team would start, or the group of people would start using the new tool, the new process, and they'd run into problems. And I'm going to use the analogy of getting married, and everything's fine and wonderful during the ceremony, and the guy is beautiful and all that kind of thing. And then 6 months into the marriage, the woman sees the toilet seats up and socks are on the floor, and she's like, "What have I done?" And I think we all face that kind of thing. We get excited about doing something new, and the reality is always less glorious than the dream, in my experience. And so, how do you persevere through those things? And that's where the organizational change aspect comes in. And if you don't have that, what can happen is people just abandon doing the change, whatever that change might be. And then engineers were good at seeing patterns, And so we see this pattern happen one or two times, and then the third or fourth time that someone comes along and said, I've got a great new way of doing things, we're like, yeah, I've seen that movie and I didn't care for the ending.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's maybe dig in a little bit. So, what does it take to get past that toilet seat up moment?
Yeah. Well, and I think that whole sequence of events when people see the changes being positive is extremely mysterious to people. Like we all know there's changes that come out that we don't like right off the bat. You know, I got it. There's a reorganization, and I'm reporting to a boss I don't care for. Okay, that's pretty simple to realize. But when you think that this is a good thing, it's mysterious when it doesn't feel so good in the middle of the change. And so I think there's four steps to change. First is realizing the status quo isn't working. Second is what are we going to change to? And then the third and fourth steps I think are the most important to avoiding this cynicism sort of cycle, if you will. One is breaking the change down into steps that can be achieved sequentially. Like I said, we're not code, we can't be recompiled. So how do we take ourselves from where we are today to where we want to go? That's the stepwise process. And then the fourth part that is the most important part and the one that I see most often um, not working well. I don't know how to exactly say that. Maybe the fourth part is the most critical and the least understood, especially by executives, is support and sponsorship along the way. So the executive sponsor that says we are going to persevere even though this is hard right now is absolutely critical to making change in an organization. And then because change is hard, even if you wanted it in the first place, support of whatever kind of support you want to give people is also very critical. But sponsorship, if you don't have sponsorship, most large scale organizational changes are not actually going to occur.
Yeah, so let's dive into a couple of those. So, I think why change? What are we going to change to? Those feel we almost brushed by those, right? We're painting the picture. Why do we need to change? What are we going to change to? Like, I think that is where a lot of us stop. Like, okay, this thing is painful. This is terrible. Here's our new vision. Breaking the change down into steps feels like something engineers would be good at because we do that for our technical projects all the time. How is it different in this world?
That's a good question. I have to think about that for a minute. I think part of what I see is um, optimism, unwarranted optimism about how easy the change is going to be, especially when the change is a tool that you're purchasing from a vendor. I mean, I work for Netlify. We provide tools that people use to develop websites. It's really not in a vendor's best interest to kind of say, this thing that you want to do might take a little bit of work and it might take some time to actually implement this tooling. So there's unwarranted optimism um, across the board. Like this is just going to be easy. And then the other piece is that as a person who's been managing projects for quite a long time, breaking things down into component pieces and planning them out is really hard to do. And a lot of people, including people who are in engineering management, have a hard time with that and aren't very good at it.
Yeah. So, what does it take? I agree. It's
Yeah,
hard. What does
yeah.
it take to do it well?
So I think you have to think about, okay, here's this thing that I want to see happen in my organization. What is a relatively small and let's say it's a year long effort. What is this something that could be accomplished within the first few weeks that leads us in this direction of this change that is achievable and not too hard to kind of get things started? When I was working as this internal consultant, we would produce short, medium, and long term roadmaps for the organizations we were working with. and the short term roadmap was 3 to 6 months. Maybe nowadays it's 1 to 3 months, or perhaps even 1 to 3 weeks. Um, but you have like this short term thing that you're trying to do, and then you kind of map out some medium term things, and then the long term thing is the final vision. And just like in agile development, you start into the process, you realize, okay, I thought this was easy, but it's hard. I thought this was hard, but it's easy. You adjust it as you go. You figure out who in the organization is good at helping provide that support. You work with the sponsor, your sponsor or sponsors, to make sure that they're doing what they need to do, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and it's interesting as you highlight that because I think a lot of these changes, we think it's going to be different than how we approach software. We think, oh, this is a process change. Either it should be easier, we think, or it should be completely different. But to your point, it's that sort of process of iteration and learning is
Hmm.
very similar.
Yeah.
We're trying to solve something where we don't know all the answers along the way. We're going to need to get feedback. We're going to need to adjust. We're going to need to kind of have that agility as we go through it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about support and sponsorship. Um, how does that show up as a part of that agile process?
So, in leading projects, the in my experience, so I've been an engineering manager, I've been a director, and I've been a vice president of engineering. And so, at each level, there is some amount of check in with where is your project at, when is it going to be done. There's some sort of dialogue about that. That kind of dialogue and attention from the various layers of management in the chain is equally important, if not more so, when it's organizational change. Because when you're working on a project, you understand, okay, we're in a business, we need to make money. This thing's going to make us money, so it needs to be done. Maybe there's customers that you've committed to. There's a lot of external pressure to make this thing happen. There's not as much external pressure when you're making organizational changes. You're trying to become more efficient. Well, what happens if you don't? No customer is going to come to you, at least not in my experience, and say, "Oh, you didn't implement, your new tracking CI/CD tool at the time you thought you were going to. What happened, and what are you going to do about that?" That never happens. But if you commit, I'm going to provide this feature for you by that date, and you don't deliver, there'll be external pressure. So this checking in, this it's a balancing act, because as a leader, you have to listen to what people say. It's hard. It doesn't work exactly the way they thought it would. There are problems. And so there's that balance between I want to hear the problems, I want to solve the problems, and we're going to do this thing that we said we were going to do. We're not going to just abandon it because we've run into a problem here.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because you highlight, there's not an external pressure, there's not a customer being disappointed, but there is an internal customer in some ways. Like the people who wanted this change will be disappointed if we abandon it.
I think they'll be disappointed in the long term in a cynical way, but in the short term, if it's painful, abandoning it might not be so bad. way,
Yeah.
way, way back in the olden days, I changed my editor from VI to Emacs because I thought that would be better. Yeah, I know I'm stepping into religious wars here, although maybe all the people that care about this are dead. But um, and for a period of time, 2 or 3 days, I couldn't type anything. Like my brain was not wired to Emacs yet, but it was unwired from VI, and so I was like in this stuck position. It was incredibly uncomfortable, and it was completely self-inflicted. Uh, had I thought that I could go back to VI and avoid that pain, I probably would have, but I sort of felt like I was stuck and I just had to keep moving forward. Um, so, uh, so yeah, there's. I think this is where the "what are we moving to" piece becomes so important, Because if executives don't understand the value of what they're moving to and how that is important to their organization, when things get hard and everyone's saying this just doesn't work as well as we thought it would, it's really easy to give up. It's easy for the executive to give up, and it's certainly easy for the people feeling the pain to give up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you get stuck in this way and you're like, okay, I'm going to give up, I'm going to do it. What are the step by step that you do to keep people motivated? I think painting that big picture is important.
Mm-hmm.
It's helpful. What else can you do to keep people, moving through that icky intermediate period where the old way is not working anymore, but the new way isn't working quite yet?
Yeah, I think you need to have. I'll use the term scouts. I'm making up all sorts of terminology during this conversation, so that's fun. I think you need to have scouts that have figured out how to overcome these problems or have the time and the energy to figure that out. And so they'll hear, hey, this thing doesn't work exactly the way we need it to. They will figure out how to make things work for the organization, and then they'll go back and work side by side with the people who are struggling with a problem and say, here's, yeah, we heard there was a problem, here's the answer that we found. Sometimes it might just be, I'm sorry, but this is going to be hard. There's some things you can't fix, but where possible, I think adjusting the process, tooling, whatever it is, whatever change you're making, adjusting it so that it works for the organization and for the people in it is a good thing to do.
Yeah. So can we maybe look at a concrete example? Is there one that is safe for you to share, and we can kind of break down how these things played out in an example?
Sure. I mean, so maybe what I'll do is I'll go way back to when I was a project manager using this agile process and sort of unconsciously or not realizing that I was doing all these steps of change. So I was managing a team that was developing some code for our product, and we need. Let's see. So the challenge here is a lot of times I'm doing this unconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and
and,
that's
and
that's why I'm trying to get you to like
yeah,
bring it out, because
yeah,
I think a lot of us, we've internalized some things that work, but that
yeah,
makes it hard to teach.
exactly. Yeah, right. And when I was teaching this was many, many, many years ago. Um, so let me talk about a example from uh, that is pretty old, and I think is safe to talk about. It does come from my experience managing hardware projects, but we're talking about the human side of working with people, so I think that's okay. Um, so I was asked to lead a team um, composed of folks in Japan who had been working with a product for a long time, and the product worked for the Japanese market, but sometimes there was bugs in it, and whenever there was a bug, uh, they would they would go travel to the customer site and fix that bug or make it work for the customer. That was the Japanese team. I was also managing a team in the States who had uh, been kind of burnt with new exciting projects where when the project didn't work out, people got laid off. So there was some reluctance there on that side. And so that was our uh, present state. The future state was these two teams working closely together and making this product work for a global market. So, um, one of the things that I one of the things that I did that I think is important in change, and I had not talked about this before, is respecting the past.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in change, we want to get everyone excited about the new way of doing things, and so we kind of trash the old way.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, that was basically would have meant disparaging people's work for several years, and I didn't want to do that. And what I've come to realize is that there's a reason why things are the way they are, and the organization has been successful up to this point doing things the way they are. And so respecting that and finding out the difference between what's causing us to want to make this change. In this particular case, it was pretty straightforward. It was we we need to take this product to a global market, and it's unfeasible to send an engineer to every customer site when there's a problem in a global environment.
Yeah.
And so, but when you're making change on some other less obvious level, I think it's still worth thinking about what is the business or impetus business reason or impetus for this change, and like what's changed externally that's causing us to want to do this. It's
Yeah.
not that people were stupid. It's not that we just didn't know what we were doing. We were being successful, and now we want to be more successful.
I love that you brought this up because it is very tied to one of the big failure modes I've seen, right? If we just trash the past, everyone who is involved in that gets defensive. When you are defensive, you are not inclined to change. You are not inclined to open yourself to possibility or anything like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
painting this picture of, you know, we were in a different situation. We made choices that made sense given our constraints in that situation at the time. They may have even served us very well. And here is how the situation has changed. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's new information that we have. Maybe it's something external has changed. Maybe it's just we didn't have the time and energy to invest then and we do now. But
Mm-hmm.
something has changed, and we want to change to either take advantage of it or to mitigate the outcomes or whatever. But like not putting the people who were involved in the prior state on the defensive is huge.
Right. Yeah, and Noel Tishy at University of Michigan has wrote a book a long time ago called The Leadership Engine that kind of illustrates this point. I will say that he worked a lot with Jack Welch and General Electric, and maybe that might cause people to have some pause. But I think if you look at the concepts that he's talking about, it makes a lot of sense. He talks about how the external environment dictates how you operate as a business, like not just like what products you do, but how you work with people. So he talks about how you have to think about your human systems as you respond to your external environment, as you create a strategy to respond to that external environment changing. You have to figure out what you're going to do with your human systems, and I think it helps to have the from and the to in that equation.
Yeah. Human systems is an interesting description.
Say
What
more.
I so you talk about the from and the to with regards to your human systems. What is the distinction you're drawing there?
So human systems are how everyone, in my mind, how everyone interacts with each other, how product and engineering interact, how support interacts with those folks, how different layers of management interact. Um, we all have usually unconscious or unspoken expectations of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're making organizational change, those expectations are changing. And that's the system that you're changing. One of the analogies I use, because I have taken different roles in the same company and then moved between companies, and so when I come into a new team, I always try to figure out what happened to bring this group to where they are today. And the
Mm.
analogy that I mentally use is I'm coming into a movie in the middle of the show, and I see things on the screen, and there's reasons that these things are happening, but because I missed the first half of the movie, I have to try to figure out why. Why are these things happening this way? And I think if you have an idea of why things are happening, it helps you figure out how to bring the organization to where you're asked to bring it to or where you think it needs to go.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so coming back to your example,
Yeah.
we broke for a moment to respect the past, right, and
Yeah.
sort of talk about what got us here. What was the next step then in getting your two teams to work together?
Um, because this was the olden days when we had offices that we worked in and we weren't working from home, I made a lot of trips between I worked in the US office and I made a lot of trips to the Japan office. I talked to the team a lot about both teams about the need to why are we needing to make this change, figuring out how we're going to work together. What pieces of the job is the Japan team going to do? What pieces of the job is the US team going to do? When there's friction, working with the different people involved to mitigate that. And and really, sponsorship wasn't really an issue here because this was a project. This was an initiative that the board of directors of the company I worked for had signed off on, and the CEO of the company happened to work on the same campus, and I often saw him in the cafeteria.
Mm-hmm.
So it was clear that there was sponsorship and that we couldn't go back to the way things had been. Um, so when I think about that experience, to me, the metric of success, or the thing that I remember as being the most the thing that made me realize, okay, we actually did make this change, is while I was on a press tour talking about this new product, we found out that the product had a fatal problem, and so I'm here's this great new product. It's awesome, and I know the teams in Japan and the U.S. are working on solving this problem, and we did solve the problem, um, and we're able to successfully launch the product. Um, so
Yeah. So one thing that you kind of touched on there, so you said you spent a lot of time in both offices, and
yeah,
with that, one of the things that highlights for me is how much conversation goes into creating organizational change. And I think that might be worth kind of expanding on the different types of conversation that have to happen throughout this process.
well, that's a really good point because there was another experience that I can think of where it became obvious to me within the first month or so of a new job that I was hired to quote fix an organization, and so I think there's conversations about understanding how we got to where we are, like why is this thing happening in the movie, and um, I think it's important to spend as much as possible to spend time in conversation, really listening to what people say um, about and trying to figure out how we got to where we are. Then there's conversations about where we're going, and those are kind of like a lot of times people will talk about what they don't want. Like, we have too many bugs. I don't want so many bugs. Um, Trying to help people figure out what is it going to look like when we're successful is painting that picture of success, and both for yourself and for, I'm assuming now we're the person, I'm talking about the person that's trying to make the change or design this change, figuring out what exactly we want to accomplish and how we'll know we're successful. Those are conversations also that are important. And then when you're in the middle of the change, the conversation is about how are things going, and being open to hearing people say this isn't working, and being inquisitive about what's not working, and trying to figure out this how can I solve this situation. So there are really three different conversations, I think, at three different stages.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth stage, well, maybe the fifth stage, because I have four stages. So maybe the fifth stage, which um, honestly I'm not personally as good at, is like solidifying the change and celebrating that we actually did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of wired to go find new problems to solve. So once the problem is solved, it becomes less interesting, and I sort of forget about that piece.
Does that ever cause problems?
Well, it can. I mean, people like to be recognized for a job well done, and they like their boss to have some amount of recognition. And so, I have I I try to mitigate that through various ways. There's also the risk that people snap back to the old way of doing things if you don't embed it in, again, the human system. If the human system doesn't have this solidified, you can snap back. One of the things that I saw a lot as a consultant is people jumping to tools without really thinking through the policy changes that need to be in place to make that
Mm-hmm.
tool be useful,
Yep.
and the process changes. And so, I mean, I try to design policy and process into the change, but if you don't have that, um, yeah, you can get people to do things for a period of time and then they go back to their old ways.
Yeah. I feel like this is something that showed up a lot. There's been like this wave of kind of people talk about business transformation or wanting to transform their businesses to be more I don't even remember the term, but like I guess agile, but they think about it in terms of technology. Okay, we
Mm-hmm.
need to get the technology in place so we're hearing directly from our customers. We need to get the technology in place so that we're able to gather data about what is everything happening. And often forgotten is the human systems that
Yeah.
those technological pieces need to be embedded in.
Oh, for sure. And I'm kind of working on that right now. So I have this ideal state for an engineering organization where we can all see the world through our customers' eyes and think the way they think. And the only way I know how to do that is to talk to customers and to see their world. And in the past, what that has meant is getting on an airplane, planes, trains, and automobiles to go visit the customer. And it's impractical to have your entire engineering organization do that. But nowadays, we have new technologies like video conferencing that allow us, and recording of videos, and ability to share bits and pieces of videos where the customer is talking about the pain that they're experiencing, and you can see their face and you can hear the tone of their voice, which is all great. There's that technology. Now, how do I, as an engineering manager that's got a lot of things on my plate, and my team has a lot of things on their plate, figure out how to utilize that technology to give help people develop that innate understanding? And how do I communicate that that is actually part of their job? And this is not, we don't just sit here listening to product owners tell us what to do, write this feature, do this code, and we're a feature factory. No, no, no. We're product minded engineers that are understanding our customers. So yeah, I'm wrestling with that right this minute, actually.
As am I. So, what have you learned? What is working and what isn't?
Well, uh so I would have to say that so far I'm at the very early phase of this process.
Okay.
um I think the tooling that is available is amazing. um, the ways that companies have built that tooling to try to make it easy to find those bits of video is amazing. Um, the challenge is, how do I make that relevant to people, and how do we so this is kind of going into a little bit of a different direction, but that's, I think, okay. Like, how do you do innovation? Innovation, in my mind, it does, there is some amount of time required for dedicated thought, but I can't get people in a room for 8 hours and say, I want you to innovate right now. Like, your subconscious, you have to prime your subconscious to work on it. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I, one, communicate that it's our job as engineers to think about this, because I think the whole concept of product ownership and Scrum has kind of made some engineers think that's not my job.
Mm.
Two, how do I prime their thinking in a time effective way? And then what do we do with those thoughts when we have them? I think it's a hard problem.
It is. Well, and one of the things that I definitely find myself wondering is, like, to your point, not every engineer currently does or even wants to be thinking about things this way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was most recently looking for work, one of the things I said is I want a role that has me close to the customer and that lets
Mm-hmm.
me have an engineering team of people who are going to be close to the customer. Often in companies, like, some of the most coveted engineering roles are these deep infrastructure roles that are as far as possible from the customer. And so I find myself wondering, how does this play out in terms of how you think about who's on your team or who should be
Mm.
on your team? And what do you do if somebody doesn't want to be thinking about the customer?
Well, and it's kind of funny you say that because my current team, and actually the last three roles I've had, including this one, are with those deep engineering teams that are like the current team I lead is responsible for the CDN that serves up content that people deploy to Netlify. And uh, so yeah, I I am fortunate in that I have some people on the team that have been with Netlify for many years and do recognize the implications of what we're doing as it pertains to customers, and are sort of driven to solve customer needs, work closely with support, and that kind of thing. Um, but I think the thing is like if you're most engineering jobs that I've had are not, if you will, custom development for a specific customer. The challenge is to understand this customer and this customer and that customer and this other customer in this other space, and what are the common elements, what are the common themes, and what how can you actually make a product that isn't specific to any single customer but works across multiple customers. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of following this direction, what are the skills that an engineer or an engineering manager needs to learn in order to start identifying those commonalities?
Hmm. I think looking at your current product as it pertains, how. So I've never worked in a green. Even the project that I was talking about, where I had the Japan team and the U.S. team, was as greenfield as I've ever done, and there was a product to start with. So how well is the current product serving your customers today, and what are the common problems that they're having? And one of the things that's not always recognized early is not every problem is worth solving. There are some problems that you can't solve in a way that is cost effective relative to how much a customer wants to pay for it. So I could solve your problem, but it's going to cost you so much money that you're never going to buy my product. That's not solving a problem for a customer. Um, and so it's balancing how important is this problem to the customer? How much are they willing to pay to have it solved? Can you build something or make something that is cost effective, and both in terms of cost of goods sold, in other words, how much does it cost me to provide this service, and also cost in terms of time to market. Can I get it to market in a reasonable time period? Um, yeah, that's kind of like product development.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways, we're talking about the core of a product management role.
Yeah, and the thing is that like I don't think engineering teams should try to like run product management, but there's a partnership there. And so product management are kind of like the scouts finding the customer problems. They're bringing information about competition to the team, but it's a when it works well, there's a collaboration between engineering and product management in terms of figuring out how to solve that. How does what can we do as an organization to address these needs of our customers? That part is a collaboration in
Mm-hmm.
my mind.
So that maybe pulls us in another direction, which is how can engineers and engineering managers better work with product managers and their sort of product colleagues?
That's a great question. I just pulled up the Pragmatic Engineers article on the product minded engineer, and he refers to another article written for product managers about how to work with product minded engineers. But the Pragmatic Engineer article is how to be a product minded engineer. And then if you really like this and you want to read a book, which most people don't actually read books, is my experience, um, Marty Marty Kagan has written Inspired about how great products get built in Silicon Valley. And so to me, it's this combination of what's in those articles. I'm not sure I can quote you specifics at this point because I hadn't been thinking about having that part of this conversation today.
Okay. Well, we can reference out to those. I guess maybe let me ask you, how do you approach working with product?
I, first of all, approach whatever level I've been in the organization. I need to have a positive working relationship with my product counterpart. Um, we need to respect each other. We need to understand each other. We need to be on the same page. Like when I zig, they know that that's what I'm going to do. When I zig and they're like, "I thought you were going to zig," I need to go back and talk through. Hey, this is what happened. This is why I did this. So that's kind of step one. Um, I need to understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. What is the benefit that we're trying to provide here, to the customer, to the market, to the business, and how does what my team is doing um, impact that? And so I need to have that inquisitive mind to understand, why I'm being asked to do something. And if I don't understand it, then that's where the good relationship comes in to basically dig into, okay, I understand you want this thing, but why? Who's asking for this? What about this? What about that case? Um, and I think sometimes product managers can feel like, well, you're questioning my competence, and it's not that. I'm trying to understand so I can better basically shape what my team does and what we do collectively to fulfill that need. Because the thing of it is like most people, when they come, most customers, when I've talked to them about what they want, they will tell me I want feature X. They won't tell me I want feature X because I have this use case. And so you have digging out the use case can be kind of hard. Um, but if you can figure out what that use case is, you might have a different idea, different implementation, a different feature that provides that benefit in a way that no one else ever thought of. And the best example I can think from my history is, again, this comes from hardware, transition from manufacturing where IBM and Motorola had basically their own manufacturing lines to contract manufacturing. And we were building test systems for manufacturing lines. And the problem with a contract manufacturer is they're going to do that job cheaper than IBM or Motorola. And they need to be able to say they can take any customer's product. And so these systems cost $1 million when that was a lot of money. And these contract manufacturers, they didn't have the capital to basically spend $1 million on a thing. And so the team that I had been part of, I wasn't really part of it when they did this, came up with a concept which I have heard people now say testing as a service, but like at the time we thought of quarters in the washing machine. And so you sell this big pile of equipment for a certain amount of money, and then however much is getting used is being charged on a per use basis. And it basically, from my perspective, transformed that business from being quite a bit behind the competition in terms of market share to being the market leader.
Hmm.
And who would have, like, I don't think any customer would have said, I want to put quarters in my test system. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I have absolutely seen that same pattern. The way I've often described it is customers or potential customers will come to you with a half-baked solution and they'll call it a problem, but really
Hmm.
they're like, "This is what I want." And you're like,
Right.
"Really? Is it though? What are you trying to do?" And
Yeah.
often through that journey of discovery, you can find a better solution because you know more about what is actually possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so coming back to the relationship with product though, I think what I was hearing was making sure that it's collaborative, making sure that it's and I almost feel like, and this is maybe a little weird, but I feel like the best product engineering relationships I've been a part of have very blurred lines. They don't have a
Hmm.
clean distinction between, okay, this is a PM's job and this is an engineering leader's job. It's more, we are coming at this thing together with slightly different perspectives and ways of thinking about things, but there's not like, oh, this is me and that is you.
For sure. And I mean, that's true across the business. So, a lot of my background has been, even though I'm a software engineer by trade, I've managed a lot of hardware development projects, and there's a similar experience between engineering and manufacturing. You know, engineering doesn't just throw the product over the wall to manufacturing and say, "Okay, we designed it, now go build it." There's a partnership and an overlap, and the same thing is true between product and engineering. There's a partnership and an overlap where product has their skills of lots of contacts with customers, lots of understanding of the industry, sometimes very deep dives into competition. And engineering has their skills of knowing what's feasible and how long things take and how much they're going to cost in the end. And so when you bring those two skills together in a collaborative relationship, you're going to come up with something that's so much better than if, you know, product designs the thing and throws it over the wall to engineering to build it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. I realize we're getting close to the end of our time. Is there anything that we haven't spoken about that you think we should?
I guess what I would say is the thing that I think is the most important for, so there's engineers who want to make change. There's engineering managers who want to see change happen or are asked to make change happen. And I think that's probably who is a lot of your audience. And so finding who's going to sponsor that, understanding what the business case is, or helping to develop that business case in partnership with your sponsor, and then helping them to understand their role in this change is so important. Most, I mean, maybe it seems like it should be obvious, but it hasn't been in my experience obvious to sponsors what they need to do to actually make change happen in their organizations. And it hasn't been obvious to individual engineers how hard it is to make change from the grassroots level. So finding that sponsor is super critical.
If you're an engineer at the grassroots roots level, how would you go about finding a sponsor?
I think you need to understand what's the issues facing the business, like we were talking about before. Why hasn't this thing already happened if it's such a good thing? Is this the right time for the change? How does this fit into what the business is trying to accomplish? And who in the organization is going to need to, if you will, sign off not only on the initial, like, we need a tool or we're going to use this process, but who's going to sign off on keeping track of are people actually doing the thing that we said we would do? Also, finding, if you're an engineer that wants to make a change, finding some like-minded people within your organization to help, because when things get tough and you're trying to figure out how to solve the problems, you're going to need some other people to help you solve those problems too. And so, best to get them lined up early.
All right, that's it for this human skills interview. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also subscribe to the Human Skills newsletter, which there's a link to right down below, to get notified of interviews like this as they come out. Take care, y'all. This is K-Ball signing out.